My daughter took my country house and gave it to her husband's family. So My name is Maud Williams, and at 67 years old, I never expected my own daughter would betray me this way. The countryside property had been in our family for generations, a modest home filled with memories of my late Thomas. When Jennifer told her husband's family they could have my house, I felt my heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. She looked me straight in the eyes and said those awful words I'll never forget. Before I tell you what happened when they tried to move in, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about standing up for yourself when family betrays you. I spent 35 years teaching third grade at Lincoln Elementary, a career I loved with all my heart. But nothing compared to the love I shared with my Thomas for 45 beautiful years before cancer took him 5 years ago. Our country house, a charming 3-bedroom farmhouse sitting on 5 acres of rolling meadows, was our weekend sanctuary about 2 hours from the city apartment where we lived during the work week. This wasn't just any property. My grandfather purchased it in 1937 during the Great Depression, when the previous owners couldn't keep up with their payments. He managed to scrape together enough money working 3 jobs to buy it for a song. My father grew up there, and eventually the house passed to me, the only child who showed any interest in preserving the family legacy. The house holds every important memory of my life. As a little girl, I spent summers helping my grandmother tend to her vegetable garden. The massive oak tree in the backyard still has the remains of the tire swing my father hung for me. Thomas and I spent our honeymoon there because we were too broke for anything fancier, and it was there that I told him I was pregnant with Jennifer. The creek that runs through the back of the property is where Thomas taught our daughter to fish, and his workshop in the old barn still smells like sawdust and pipe tobacco. After Thomas passed, money became tighter. My teacher's pension only stretches so far, and the property taxes were substantial. Several developers offered to buy the land, prime real estate for subdivision, they said, but I refused every offer. Some things are worth more than money. My plan had always been to move to the farmhouse permanently after retirement. The city held too many memories of Thomas, and I wanted the peace of country living in my golden years. For the past 3 years, I'd been slowly renovating the old place, doing much of the work myself. I painted all the interior walls, refinished the hardwood floors in the living room, and planted a memorial garden for Thomas near the creek. Every nail hammered and every board replaced was an act of love and determination to create my forever home. Jennifer was always different from Thomas and me. Where we loved the simplicity of nature and quiet evenings on the porch, she craved excitement and status. As a child, she complained about our weekend trips to the country, preferring to stay in the city with her friends. She grew into a driven young woman, putting herself through law school and landing a prestigious position at a corporate firm downtown. I was proud of her ambition, even if I didn't always understand it. She met Tyler Blackwood at a charity gala 4 years ago. He worked in investment banking, came from old money, and had the kind of polished charm that can either put you at ease or make you deeply uncomfortable. For me, it was the latter. There was something calculating behind his smile, a coldness in his eyes when he thought no one was looking. But Jennifer was smitten, dazzled by his wealth and connections. During their courtship, I noticed how Tyler subtly controlled their relationship. He chose the restaurants, interrupted Jennifer when she spoke, and made decisions about their plans without consulting her. When I gently mentioned these concerns, Jennifer accused me of being old-fashioned and jealous of her happiness. Their wedding was an extravagant affair at the Grand Wellington Hotel. 300 guests, many of whom Jennifer had never mentioned before, dined on imported delicacies and drank champagne that cost more than my monthly pension. I felt out of place in my department store dress, especially when seated at a table far from the bride and groom with distant acquaintances who barely acknowledged my existence. Tyler's parents, Harold and Sylvia Blackwood, made no effort to hide their disdain for me. Harold asked if I'd managed to save anything for retirement teaching in those dreadful public schools, while Sylvia commented that it was so quaint that I'd done my own hair for the wedding. They spoke about their multiple homes and extensive travels, making it clear they found my simple life pathetic. After the wedding, I saw less and less of Jennifer. Sunday dinners became monthly phone calls. Birthdays and holidays were celebrated with brief visits, or sometimes just cards. When I did see her, Tyler was always present, steering the conversation toward topics that highlighted their success or my shortcomings. Jennifer changed in those years. Her wardrobe became exclusively designer labels. She began using phrases like summer as a verb and referring to her childhood home as modest, with a hint of embarrassment. She adopted the Blackwood family's habit of speaking about money as if discussing the weather casually but constantly. When they did visit, the tension was palpable. Jennifer would inspect the apartment with critical eyes, suggesting updates I couldn't afford. Tyler would check his watch repeatedly, making it clear our time together was an obligation to be endured rather than enjoyed. I tried everything to maintain our relationship, cooking Jennifer's favorite meals, asking about her cases, showing genuine interest in their lives. But the distance between us grew with each passing month. Last spring, Jennifer called unexpectedly on a Tuesday evening. She and Tyler would be in my area that weekend and wanted to stop by for lunch on Saturday. I was thrilled. I spent days cleaning the apartment, preparing Jennifer's favorite chicken pot pie from scratch, and even splurged on an expensive bottle of wine I knew Tyler would approve of. When they arrived, something felt off. Jennifer hugged me with unusual warmth, and Tyler was positively chatty, asking about my garden at the country house and whether I still enjoyed the drive out there. Throughout lunch, they kept returning to the topic of the farmhouse, its condition, the surrounding properties, whether I went there often. "Mom," Jennifer said, as I served coffee and apple pie, "have you thought any more about your retirement plans?" I told them excitedly about my progress on the renovations and how I plan to move there permanently within the year. "But Mom, that old house is so much work," Jennifer said, her tone suddenly concerned. "All that maintenance, the long driveway to clear in winter, and you'd be so isolated. At your age, is that really wise?" "At my age?" I laughed. "I'm not exactly ready for a nursing home, Jennifer. Besides, the Willis family next door checks in on me when I'm there, and I've made friends with several people in town." "Still," Tyler interjected, "it seems impractical to keep such a large property for just one person." "That house has been in our family for generations," I said firmly. "It's where I want to spend my remaining years, surrounded by memories of your father and my parents." Jennifer's expression hardened. "Actually, Mom, we've been thinking it would make a perfect vacation home for Tyler's parents. They've been looking for a place in that area, and it would solve so many problems at once." I felt like I'd been doused with ice water. "What problems would it solve exactly?" "Well, you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining it for one thing. And let's be honest, you could use the money from the sale. Your pension can't be covering all your expenses comfortably." "I'm not selling the farmhouse, Jennifer. Not to Tyler's parents, not to anyone." Jennifer's face flushed with anger. "That's so selfish. You're one person rattling around in a 3-bedroom house you only visit occasionally, while Harold and Sylvia could actually use the property. Plus, they'd pay you well above market value. It's not about the money. It's never about the money. With you, is it, Mom? That's your problem. You live in this fantasy world where sentimental value trumps practical considerations." The argument escalated quickly. Jennifer revealed she had already promised the house to Tyler's parents as a vacation home, assuring them I would be reasonable when approached about selling. When I remained firm in my refusal, she stood up, her lunch barely touched. "You need to think about this carefully," she said coldly. "If you can't do this one thing for me after all the times I've accommodated your old-fashioned values and embarrassing frugality, then maybe we need to reevaluate our relationship." Tyler stood beside her, placing a proprietary hand on her shoulder. "Maud family should support each other. Jennifer has built a life that can benefit everyone, including you, if you'd just be more open-minded. Think about what's best for everyone, not just your nostalgia." They left without saying goodbye, Jennifer slamming the door hard enough to rattle the family photos on my hallway wall. I sat among the remains of our uneaten dessert, too shocked to even cry. 3 weeks passed without a word from Jennifer. I called twice, leaving voicemails that went unreturned. Then a certified letter arrived at my apartment. The return address was Jennifer's law firm. Inside was a formal letter, written in cold legal language, claiming that I had verbally promised the farmhouse to Jennifer years ago as an early inheritance. It stated that based on this promise, she had made significant life decisions, and that my sudden retraction of this promise constituted a breach of verbal contract. The letter concluded with a thinly veiled threat of legal action if I didn't honor my commitment by signing over the property within 30 days. My hands shook as I read it. I had never, not once, promised Jennifer the house. The blatant lie stunned me almost as much as the fact that my own daughter would use her legal training against me. 2 days later, Mary Willis, my neighbor at the farmhouse, called. "Maud, I thought you should know there were people at your place yesterday, a couple about your age and Jennifer. They were walking the property line and taking pictures. They went inside, too. I assumed you knew about it, but something felt off." The spare key. I kept one hidden under a false rock near the back porch for emergencies. Jennifer knew where it was from her childhood. I drove out to the farmhouse that afternoon and found small but telling signs of intrusion. Mud tracked across my clean kitchen floor, a bedroom window left unlocked, measuring tape left on the dining room table, and the spare key was missing from its hiding place. When I returned to the city, there was a voicemail from Bill Jenkins, the farmer whose property adjoined the back acres of my land. "Maud, just letting you know, some folks were asking me about the easement along our property line today. Older couple, very uppity types. Said they were thinking of building a guest house near the creek and wanted to know if I'd object. Told them they'd need to talk to you since it's your land, and they acted like that was just a formality. Thought you'd want to know." I felt physically ill. Not only were Tyler's parents inspecting my property without permission, they were already making plans to alter it. I called Jennifer immediately. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice clipped and professional, until she realized it was me. "What do you want, Mom? I'm in the middle of preparing for court tomorrow." "I want to know why Tyler's parents were at my house making plans for construction without my permission," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. There was a pause, then Jennifer sighed heavily. "I was going to call you about that. Since you're being so difficult about the sale, we decided to move forward with a different arrangement. Tyler's parents will be using the house as their vacation property starting next month." "And how exactly do you think that's going to work, since I own the house and have no intention of letting them use it?" "Mom, be reasonable. You're in the city most of the time anyway. They're just going to use it when you're not there. Eventually you'll see this makes sense for everyone and sign the paperwork." "Jennifer, that is trespassing. I did not and will not give permission for anyone to use my property." Her voice turned cold. "It's their house now, Mom. You have no rights to go there anymore. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for everyone." I hung up, my entire body trembling. That night I barely slept, my mind racing between hurt, anger, and confusion. Had I somehow failed as a mother to raise a daughter who would treat me this way? Was I being selfish by not giving up the house? Should I just surrender for the sake of peace? The next morning I called Sarah Johnston, my closest friend since college, and a retired family law attorney. We met for coffee and I brought the letter and explained everything that had happened. Sarah's expression grew increasingly troubled as I spoke. "Maud, this is serious. That letter contains outright falsehoods, and entering your property without permission is trespassing, family or not. Jennifer should know better both as your daughter and as an attorney. Sarah recommended I consult with Alan Parker, an attorney who specialized in elder law and property disputes. I met with him that afternoon. Mrs. Williams, based on what you've told me and the documentation you've provided, your daughter has absolutely no legal claim to your property, Alan assured me. A verbal promise of inheritance, even if you had made one which you didn't, is not enforceable in this state without substantial evidence and partial performance. He asked if I had my property, deed, and will. Fortunately, after Thomas died, I had organized all our important papers. The property was solely in my name, and my will, last updated 2 years ago, left the house to Jennifer. Only upon my death, with specific provisions that it couldn't be sold outside the family for at least 10 years afterward. A clause I'd included to preserve our family history. There's something else you should know, Alan said, looking uncomfortable. I took the liberty of checking public records before our meeting. There was a preliminary transfer document filed with the county clerk's office 3 weeks ago with what appears to be your signature granting Jennifer power of attorney, specifically for the farmhouse property. My blood ran cold. I never signed anything like that. Alan slid the document across his desk. The signature did look like mine, but I had absolutely no recollection of signing it. Then I noticed the date, April 15th. I was in Florida visiting my cousin that week. I couldn't have signed this. Alan's expression darkened. Then we're looking at forgery, which is a serious criminal offense, especially for an attorney who should know better. Further investigation revealed more disturbing facts. Through his contacts, Alan discovered that Tyler's family business, Blackwood Investments, was facing financial difficulties after several high-risk ventures failed. They had recently liquidated one of their vacation properties in Colorado, and there were rumors of cash flow problems. Even more heartbreaking was what we learned from a clerk at the county planning office. The Blackwoods had already submitted preliminary architectural plans for the property, not to renovate the existing farmhouse, but to demolish it entirely and build a modern 5-bedroom retreat with a pool and tennis court. They never intended to preserve my family home or its history. They planned to destroy it and replace it with another trophy property to maintain the appearance of wealth while their finances crumbled behind the scenes. I sat in my apartment that night surrounded by photo albums spanning decades of family history at the farmhouse. Pictures of my grandfather proudly standing on the porch the day he bought it. My parents' 20th anniversary celebration in the backyard. Jennifer taking her first steps across the living room floor. Thomas building the garden shed that still stood behind the house. All of it would be bulldozed if the Blackwoods had their way. And my own daughter had not only enabled their plan, but actively participated in it, going so far as to forge my signature on legal documents. The realization crystallized something in me. This wasn't just about a house anymore. It was about standing up for myself, for Thomas's memory, for my family's legacy, and for the truth. For perhaps the first time in my life, I felt a steel-like resolve harden in my spine. I would not be pushed aside, lied to, or manipulated, not even by my only child. The next morning I called Alan and told him I wanted to fight. Together we developed a comprehensive plan to protect my property and address Jennifer's actions. First, we secured all legal documentation proving my ownership and filed papers with the county clerk invalidating the fraudulent power of attorney document. Alan helped me draft a cease and desist letter to Jennifer Tyler and his parents, explicitly stating that they had no permission to enter my property and that any further trespassing would result in legal action. Next, I drove out to the farmhouse and had all the locks changed by a local locksmith who had known my family for years. I installed a security camera system that would alert my phone if anyone entered the property. The spare key hiding place was eliminated. No more key under a rock for emergencies. I decided to accelerate my retirement plans. Rather than waiting until the end of the year, I packed up my city apartment, put most of the furniture in storage, and moved permanently to the farmhouse within 2 weeks. If anyone was going to live in my family home, it would be me. When Jennifer called, furious after receiving the cease and desist letter, I took a different approach than she expected. Instead of arguing, I sounded tired and defeated. "Jennifer, I'm just trying to process everything. This house means so much to me, but I understand you and Tyler's parents have already made plans. I just need a little time to come to terms with it and move my things. Can you give me that much at least?" Her tone immediately softened, sensing victory. "Of course, Mom. Take the next few weeks to get your things together. The Blackwoods aren't planning to start using the place until the end of the month anyway." "Thank you, sweetheart. I appreciate your understanding, and please ask Tyler's parents not to visit the property until I've had a chance to remove my personal items. It would just be too painful to run into them there right now." "I'll let them know. And Mom, I think you're making the right decision. This really is better for everyone." I hated the deception, but as Alan had pointed out, I needed time to fully secure my position. While appearing to comply with their demands, I was actually fortifying my defenses. I continued the renovations on the house with renewed purpose, but now they were strategic, documenting every improvement with dated photographs, keeping all receipts, establishing clear evidence of my ongoing investment in and commitment to the property. I reached out to my neighbors and the local police department, explaining the situation and providing them with copies of the cease and desist letter. Bill Jenkins, whose farm backed up to my property, offered to keep an eye on the place and call me immediately if the Blackwoods showed up. Mary Willis brought over a casserole the day after I moved in and promised her husband would help with any heavy lifting I needed done. "We're not having some city folks push you around, Maud. This is your home, and everyone in town knows it." Their support bolstered my courage. After decades of teaching children to stand up for themselves and do what's right, even when it's difficult, I was finally taking my own advice. I would not be bullied out of my home, not even by my own daughter. 2 weeks later, Jennifer called to inform me that Tyler's parents would be arriving that Saturday to take possession of the property. She offered to come along to help with the transition, but mentioned she had an important brunch on Sunday, so she couldn't stay overnight. "That's fine, dear," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I've moved most of my things already. Just remind them the master bedroom has that tricky lock sometimes." Saturday morning arrived with perfect early summer weather. I spent the day preparing. I baked Thomas's famous blueberry muffins, brewed fresh coffee, and set the dining room table with my grandmother's best china. I wanted to be the perfect hostess for what would surely be a memorable gathering. At precisely 2 o'clock, I heard car doors slam in the driveway. Through the front window, I watched Jennifer, Tyler, Harold, and Sylvia approach the house. Behind them, a moving truck waited, already loaded with furniture I presumed was meant to replace mine. Jennifer used her key in the front door, only to find it didn't work. After a moment of confusion, she knocked. I opened the door with a warm smile, dressed in my gardening clothes, clearly in the middle of planting the window boxes. "Mom, what are you doing here? I thought you'd be gone by now." Jennifer's face registered shock, then rapidly transitioning to anger. "Why would I be gone from my own home? Come in, everyone. I've just made coffee and muffins." They followed me inside, Harold and Sylvia exchanging confused glances. The house was obviously occupied, not by a woman in the process of moving out, but by one who was settled in and making improvements. Fresh paint brightened the hallway. New curtains hung in the living room, and family photos had been rearranged and added to. "There must be some misunderstanding," Tyler began smoothly. "Jennifer explained that you had agreed to let my parents use the property as their vacation home starting today." "No misunderstanding at all," I replied cheerfully, pouring coffee into my grandmother's delicate cups. "Jennifer and I spoke about your parents' interest in my home, but I never agreed to give it to them. In fact, I've made it quite clear that I'm living here permanently now. Muffin Sylvia. Sylvia ignored the offered plate. Jennifer assured us you had signed the necessary paperwork. We've already sold our lake house in anticipation of acquiring this property. Yes, about that paperwork. I walked to the sideboard and retrieved a folder, which I placed on the table. My attorney was quite interested in this document with my purported signature, especially since I was in Florida on the date it was allegedly signed. He's prepared a rather detailed analysis for the State Bar Association regarding the ethical implications of forgery committed by a licensed attorney. Jennifer's face drained of color. Mom, you're blowing this way out of proportion. We were just trying to help you make a practical decision about a property that's too much for you to handle alone. By forging my signature and filing false documents, by planning to bulldoze my family home and replace it with a modern mansion. I opened another folder containing the architectural plans they had filed with the county. Yes, I know about these too. Did you really think no one at the planning office would mention them to me? I've lived in this community for decades. Harold Blackwood's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Jennifer, you told us your mother was on board with this arrangement. You said she had signed the power of attorney willingly. And you told me, I added, that they were going to preserve the house and enjoy it as it is, not tear it down to build some monstrosity that would destroy every trace of my family's history here. The room fell silent except for the ticking of my grandfather's clock on the mantel. Tyler was the first to recover, adopting a conciliatory tone. Maud, clearly there have been some miscommunications. Perhaps we can discuss a compromise that works for everyone. My parents could purchase a portion of the land for their new construction, leaving you the original house and immediate surroundings. That's a generous offer, Tyler, but no. This property has been in my family for 3 generations, and it will remain intact. I'm not selling, not part of it, not all of it, not now, not ever. I stood and collected the untouched coffee cups. I've filed reports with local law enforcement about the trespassing that has already occurred. I've provided them with copies of the fraudulent documents Jennifer created. I've installed security cameras around the property perimeter, and I've established residence here permanently. If you wish to pursue this matter further, my attorney is prepared to defend my interests vigorously, including filing criminal charges if necessary. Jennifer jumped to her feet. You would do that to your own daughter, file criminal charges against me after everything I've done for you. What exactly have you done for me, Jennifer? Lied to me, forged my signature, planned to destroy my home and family legacy, treated me like I'm too senile to make my own decisions about my own property. Her face contorted with rage and embarrassment. You've always been like this. Living in the past, clinging to worthless sentimentality instead of making practical choices. No wonder I turned out the way I did with you as a mother. That barb stung, but I remained calm. I raised you to be honest, respectful, and to value family above material gain. If those lessons didn't take, that's not a failure of my teaching, but of your learning. Harold and Sylvia were now standing too, their expressions a mixture of anger and humiliation. We were told this was a straightforward property transfer, Harold said stiffly. We would never have proceeded if we'd known there was any question about your willingness to sell. Really, Harold? You didn't find it at all suspicious that you were getting a 5-acre property with a historic home for well below market value? That my daughter was handling all the paperwork without my presence at any meetings? That you were submitting construction plans before the sale was even finalized? Sylvia turned to Jennifer, her voice ice cold. You assured us everything was legitimate. You said your mother was moving to assisted living and needed to liquidate her assets quickly. Assisted living. I laughed despite myself. I'm 67 in perfect health and fully capable of living independently for many years to come. Another lie in a long series of them, it seems. Tyler attempted damage control. Perhaps we should all take some time to cool down and discuss this another day. There's nothing to discuss, I said firmly. "This is my home. It will remain my home until I die. At which point, according to my newly updated will, it will go into a trust that prevents its sale or substantial alteration for 50 years. Now I believe you all have a long drive back to the city, and that moving truck must be charging by the hour." They left in a flurry of slammed doors and squealing tires. Jennifer didn't even look back at me as they drove away, but I noticed that Harold and Sylvia were sitting as far from her, and Tyler, as the confines of their luxury SUV would allow. The aftermath was painful. Jennifer didn't speak to me for months. She sent a formal letter of apology, clearly written under duress, after the State Bar Association began investigating the forgery complaint that Alan insisted on filing, despite my reluctance. She managed to avoid disbarment, but received a formal censure and was required to complete ethics training. Tyler's parents severed ties with them shortly after our confrontation, adding financial strain to their marriage, as Harold withdrew the support that had enabled their lavish lifestyle. I grieved the relationship with my daughter, but I refused to accept blame for standing up for myself. The farmhouse became my sanctuary and my joy. I joined the local historical society, expanded my garden, and eventually opened 2 of the bedrooms as a small bed and breakfast for hikers exploring the nearby state park. Last Christmas, I received a card from Jennifer, the first personal communication in over a year. Inside was a brief note. "I'm beginning to understand the value of things that can't be bought or sold. Maybe someday we can talk about that. Jay." It wasn't an apology, but it was a start. I wrote back inviting her to visit whenever she was ready, alone without Tyler. I haven't heard back yet, but the invitation stands. What I learned through this painful experience is that family loyalty has limits, and those limits must include self-respect. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary even when it hurts, even when it means standing against those you love most. I lost a daughter temporarily, but I found a strength in myself I never knew I had, and I preserved a legacy that deserves to continue. I often sit on the front porch at sunset in the rocking chair Thomas built for me 20 years ago and feel a profound peace with my decision. Some might say I chose a house over my daughter, but that's not true. I chose integrity over manipulation, truth over deception, and self-respect over surrender. Those are choices I can live with in this home that will always be mine. Have you ever had to stand up to family when they crossed a line? What did you do, and how did it change your relationship? Drop your experiences in the comments, and if this story resonated with you, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. Share this video with someone who might need encouragement to stand their ground when facing family pressure. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply say no with a smile.